When we think of treating cancer these days, in terms of being able to kill cancer cells, that many of the techniques like chemotherapy could kill 99.9% of the cancer cells. But I think the point you were making was that that isn't good enough. Despite incredible advances in modern medicine, cancer remains a huge challenge for all of us. So, what are we to do? Well, we can create new types of treatments, new therapeutic approaches, or we can try to augment or improve existing cancer therapies. And that's the subject of our time together today with Dr. Valter Longo. What Dr. Longo has done, and really is perhaps recognized as the world leader in dietary interventions for cancer therapy, he has recognized the value of what's called the ketogenic diet along with mainstream cancer therapeutics in the treatment of cancer, and with great success. His new book is called Fasting Cancer. So he talks about the idea that metabolically challenging cancer cells will augment or enhance, for example, chemotherapy. I'm very much looking forward to our time with Dr. Valter Longo today. Let me tell you a little bit more about him. Dr. Valter Longo is the director of the Longevity Institute at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. He studies basic and clinical research on nutrition, aging, and diseases with a focus on cancer and also autoimmunity, Alzheimer's disease, and even cardiometabolic diseases. Dr. Longo received the 2010 Nathan Schock Lecture Award from the National Institute on Aging, the 2013 Vincent Cristofalo Rising Star Award in Aging Research from the American Federation for Aging Research, and the 2016 Glenn Award for Research in the Biological Mechanisms of Aging. In 2018, Time magazine named him one of the 50 most influential people in healthcare. And in 2021, Science magazine called him a pioneer in nutrition and cancer. He is the author of a book we've talked about on the program before, The Longevity Diet. And as mentioned, we are going to be discussing today his new book, which is called Fasting Cancer. Let's get right to our interview. Well, Dr. Longo, it's really great to have you back here on the program.
Nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm very taken by the book, Fasting Cancer. Who knew? What an idea. So why don't we just start off for our audience and explain what cancer is?
Yes. So cancer has a lot of characteristics, but usually some of the most important ones are mutations, or at least what's called epigenetic changes. So the modification of DNA, they make them different from other cells. And they're usually better able to stay alive under tough conditions. Let's say something called apoptosis. They're good at blocking apoptosis. And they, among these mutations, they often have tumor suppressor mutations. So they get rid of blockers, of guards, let's say, that have the job of stopping them from becoming cancer cells. And these tumor suppressors is one of the guards, and lots of other features. For example, the ability often to escape the immune system and to fool the immune system into making sure that they recognize as self and not as something foreign. I mean, they are self, but they're modified, and the immune system likes to kill them. But they have ways to through this PD1, PD-L1 communication system, they have ways to tell the immune system, the T cells particularly, don't attack me because I'm one of yours.
Well, one of the metrics that has been described that relates to aging cells and ultimately cells dying is the length of their telomeres. And you describe in the book that cancer sort of takes advantage of telomeres in a way that allows it to survive.
Yes. So one of the features of cancer cells is to have long enough telomeres so that they can escape what's called replicative senescence. And one of the jobs, everybody believes that of replicate senescence, this clock, this aging clock within the body's cells. One of the jobs is to make sure that the cell doesn't become a cancer cell. So the cancer cell activates something called telomerase, and this telomerase has the job of keeping the sort of violating the rules of maybe I'm old, I should get out of the way. Yes, maybe I'm old, but I'll keep going, and now I become an opportunity to become a cancer cancer cell.
So when we think of treating cancer these days, you made an interesting point. You said that actually, in terms of being able to kill cancer cells, that many of the techniques like chemotherapy could kill 99.9% of the cancer cells. But I think the point you were making was that that isn't good enough. That when we leave just a 0.1% of cancer cells are able to survive and modify themselves, change themselves to fit the new environment, that becomes a problem for us.
Yes, and you have both. I think you have an evolution of the cancer on one side, but within the cancer, you already have some cells that are already predisposed to resist a particular therapy. And it doesn't matter what it is. It can be immunotherapy, can be hormone therapy, can be chemotherapy, radiation. Yeah, so they either way, either they're predisposed or they become resistant. Either way, now you have a cancer that is very difficult to fight, especially if you only have one type of therapy or a few type of therapies, because now you're in trouble, right? You don't have anything to fight it with anymore. So we always say it's better to attack it from multiple sides early, because once they're resistant to one thing, then they can become resistant to the second thing and even the third thing. So the third therapy. So if you would do monotherapy one at a time, that makes it easier for them to escape.
Mm-hmm. And I think cancer patients experience that. They see that their scans show improvement. The size of the tumor seems to be reducing, and there's cause for celebration. But the way you describe it, really, if there's residual cancer, it has the ability to adapt to this new challenge, and then cancers can begin to grow again, and people ultimately can have worsening issues with them. I think it seems like we don't really recognize the relationship between metabolic health and cancer. And, we'll obviously get to metabolism of the cancer cell and why your program is so effective. But, recently we've seen a lot of data talking about cancer in younger people. And why would that be, especially bowel cancer in younger people? And I think one of the explanations has been that metabolically younger and younger people are having issues in terms of metabolic health, becoming obviously a global issue. So you talk about this notion of an unconspired conspiracy, of this relationship between the foods that we are eating, the foods that we are kind of convinced to eat by virtue of media, and then how that ultimately plays into our requirement for pharmaceutical intervention, cancer intervention, et cetera. So how are you getting your arms around this relationship between our declining metabolic condition, health in general, and ever increasing rates of cancer?
Yeah, so it's metabolic, but it's also aging, right? So probably now the people that are turning 100 now, they probably were fairly poor 100 years ago, right? And so they had very little food to eat, or limited amount of food. Most of them did not have overweight or obesity. So there's both the obesity and overweight component, and the bad food and the pro-aging food, right? So it's all took a long, long time.
So
Proteins and
go ahead.
certain amino acid accelerate aging. Now, and so people are eating just too much proteins, right? And they're confusing sufficient amount of proteins with too much protein. So,
And as it relates to protein, is it in particular those proteins that are mTOR activating, that are higher, for example, in certain amino acids, branched chain amino acid, in your opinion, that may be increasing the risk?
Well, TOR is certainly one of them, the branched-chain amino acids, but I think it's a lot more than that. And it's a number of amino acids can signal through different pro-aging, pro-growth, but pro-aging.
So the fundamental of the book is that you believe that you have the ability to make cancer cells more responsive to standard treatment. And just to be clear, that you're not describing fasting or a fasting mimicking diet as a primary therapy, but an adjunctive therapy, correct?
Correct. Yes. So
Yeah.
the idea is to make the escape pathways, because based on what we were saying earlier, resistance could be a million different things, right? So you will have to know what that resistant cell is and then react to it. Right? And even then, it might not work. The therapy might not work. So you need wildcard type therapies that are much more wide acting, and they force the many cancer cells, into a few escape pathways, meaning they can stay alive only by activating a few pathways, right? And then it's much easier to target them, because you need a more limited set of drugs, as long as you have this wild card.
Mm-hmm. And let's take a step back. You are pretty much, you and Otto Warburg are kind of like the fathers of this whole notion. How did you get involved in the idea that fasting and creating a different metabolic environment might be a good thing to help us in how we deal with cancer cells?
Well, in my case, I think it was quite different from what Warburg was describing, which was just that the cancer cell need more sugar and to do more glycolysis. But I think in our case was more about differential direction, right? So the normal cells are highly evolved into being able to withstand starvation conditions, and the cancer cells are not. But they're okay, right? They don't mind starvation, right? They can steal from everything else, right? So then I think it was just a matter of identifying what we call differential stress resistance sensitization. So I'm not really just differentiating, I'm differentiating the ability to withstand stress, right? And that's the trick, right? So I make the cancer cells much weaker against, let's say, chemo, radio, immunotherapy, and I make the normal cells much stronger. So we're sending them in opposite directions. And so I always give the analogy of the people in the desert, right? So I say, if you have 1 billion people in the desert, it's a lot of people. But if you give them shade and you give them water and they can sit down, after a couple of weeks, most of them will be alive, right? But if you put the same billion people in the desert, and you take away the shade and you take away the water and you make them run, there is no way even a single person will be alive, after 2 weeks, right? So this is differential stress resistance sensitization. It goes from 1 billion out of 1 billion alive to 1 billion out of 1 billion dead.
So you use another metaphor in the book talking about Napoleon's invasion of Russia. I thought that was great. And that what the Russians, when Napoleon and his army finally made it into, I guess it was Moscow, that they found the city was basically empty and there were no resources for them. So they were under great pressure. So they actually were less resistant to being in the future to be able to fight war and survive. And that's what seems to, through your metaphor, what you're doing to these cancer cells in an adjunctive way. So you talk about fasting the body in general, and as such fasting the cancer cells. Then, however, you develop the fasting mimicking diet to make this more, I hate to use the word palatable, but acceptable or usable or user-friendly, let's say, because not everybody is going to be equipped to fast. So how does then the fasting mimicking diet, maybe you can walk us through what that actually means. How does that compare and why is it effective?
Yeah, so actually we tried the fasting many years ago at USC Norris Cancer Center, and most patients did not want to do water-only fasting, or certainly it was not welcomed by the patient. It was not, the oncologists were okay with it, but they were worried too. And, Yeah, so I think it was very clear that this was not going to be successful as a water-only intervention. People felt cheated, and the oncologists were worried. Yeah, so then the fasting mimicking diet comes out of NIH funding, and just that purpose, we say, well, what can people eat that will have a response that is very similar if they didn't if they did not eat at all. And so, the fasting mimicking diet is a low calorie, low protein, low sugar, high fat, plant-based diet, right? And there's a lot of reasons for doing this. So we were not trying to make a fasting mimicking. We were also trying to make it very healthy. So we wanted to combine the two things. Like, let's make it as healthy as possible, and also fasting mimicking. And so combine the sort of like the longevity zones of the world type of diet with the fasting mimicking properties.
Well, how does this compare to what is sort of standard approach to telling cancer patients what they should be eating? Because as cancer patients start to lose weight, it seems to me that a common recommendation they receive is, well, you need to start packing on the pounds. You need to start eating, sweets and eating carbs, et cetera, because you need to keep your weight up. So it seems that what you're talking about here, though effective, seems to be in contradistinction to what mainstream is sort of telling cancer patients.
Yeah, well, I mean, the cancer world has changed a lot, right? So if you look at, prostate cancer hormone therapy, breast cancer hormone therapy, some of the most popular therapies on earth, they actually make people gain weight, right? Not lose weight. So so then there's a lot of cancers for which this is not an issue. But even those for which this is an issue, I think we have exclusion criteria. Of course, somebody that BMI 18, 19, 20 even, and lower. But also the question is, which one is the biggest enemy, right? So if somebody's cancer is not very aggressive and they're becoming cachectic, you probably don't want to take a chance, right? Just worry about the patient, make the patient stronger, and do the standard of care therapy, and that's it. But if the cancer is very aggressive and nothing is working, now that, if the cachexia or certainly the weight loss is not so severe, it's better to, and this is coming from a lot of trials that we run, we believe it's better to focus on the cancer, right? Focus on the cancer and make sure that, the patient doesn't get worse, right? So help the patient maintain the weight, maintain the muscle mass. And so, for example, in one trial in Genova, in Italy, we had this argument with the physician, not the oncologist. The oncologists were fine with having the fasting mimicking diet followed by what we call the longevity diet, which is a fairly, very healthy, fairly restricted type of diet. But the physician that was in charge of the diet said, no way, I want to make much more proteins, much more nourishment in the in-between diet, right? And so we saw the women started gaining muscle mass, right? Which it's not what we were trying to do. We were trying to keep them in a normal muscle mass and then kill the cancer. Instead, that we probably protected the cancer and to some extent, but they gained muscle mass, right? So yeah, big mistake, right? But because of what you just said, we lost that argument. Because I think the silos, right? So the oncologists were more on our side, I think, but the physician was like, no, I'm just protecting the patient and the weight, and I'm not allowing less than, let's say 1.5 grams of proteins per kilogram of body weight. And we don't know what the consequences of that were, but we can guess.
So when a patient is engaged in the protocol, what sort of biomarkers are you looking at while this patient is in the midst of treatment?
Well, I mean, most of the times this is available for clinical trials. It's not available in the real world. So in the real world, we basically, we have foundation clinics, and the dietitians and the nutritionists in the foundation clinic work with the oncologist and just make sure that the oncologist is okay. I mean, believes that could be helpful for the patient. And then, they usually say if it's chemotherapy, is usually done on day 3 or 4 of the chemo, and to give patients another 1 or 2 days post chemo to deplete as much as possible the chemo in the blood before refeeding. What you don't want to do is refeed at the same time as you have lots of chemo in the system, or radiation, or anything that could be carcinogenic in nature, because now you have a signal to expand cellular proliferation at the same time with carcinogens present, and that's a recipe for disaster. This is why we tell people, don't improvise. It's much more complicated than people are aware of, and so I think it's best to work with those that like we do do a lot of molecular work on all of these models.
So is this when patients are full on, are they in ketosis?
The patients by day 3 or 4, they usually are in ketosis. With the cancer, we have a more severe type of diet, so they're probably at a pretty good level of ketone bodies, and they have usually and this is from the clinical trial, they have low glucose, high IGF-PP1, low IGF-1. So yeah, they're getting to that fasting response state where the normal cells now are going into this shielded mode. They stand by and they sit there until the IGF-1 goes up, the glucose goes up, and lots of other things, right? And but the cancer cells generally, they just keep on going, right? And that's why what I was saying about the desert, right? Running in the desert. The cancer cells are like people running in the desert, right? Alone, not enough to kill a lot of people, right? But if you then do other things, like remove the water and then keep them under the sun, right? So the sun is the chemo, the water is the fasting, and the running is the cancer cell, right? So it's representing the property of cancer cells.
It's a great metaphor. So which cancers seem most responsive?
Now we're getting to the point that doesn't really matter what cancer it is, because we're doing starvation escape targeting, right? So, and now we and many other labs now have shown it for breast cancer, triple negative, ER positive, lung cancer, many different lung cancers, colorectal cancer, many different lines, liver cancer, glioblastoma, neuroblastoma. So I mean, it works very consistently if you combine it with whatever works well with that particular cancer, like temozolomide, right? You're a neurologist, and it works best if you combine it with something that is already well established to be effective with that particular cancer. And but now we have the escape pathway methodology. So we do RNA-seq. So we look at the gene expression in the cancer. We compare it with cancer cells that are with the standard diet, and then we can identify very quickly the escape pathways, meaning we can find out how they have rewired to stay alive, and then we can target those, right? So this has been working very, very well with different cancers. We'll see how wide is it. Is it all cancers? Is it only part of the cancers? But we're really excited about this computational method to be combined with this wide-acting fasting mimicking diet, plus the specific targeted therapy that already exists.
And I think one question somebody may wonder about is there the risk that cancer could ultimately develop some sort of metabolic adaptation to then be resistant to this type of intervention? Or is that just off the table?
No, they do, right? They do a lot less because, of course, if you just give a chemo, then they almost always become adapted, right? If you give a chemo plus fasting mimicking diet, now, we get 20, 30, 40% of cancer-free survival in mouse models. And now we're starting to see big effects in let's say, triple-negative breast cancer. For example, women that receive the FMD, metastatic triple-negative, women that receive the FMD, fasting mimicking diet plus chemo, the overall survival is nearly twice as long as just chemo alone. So these are early studies, but now you have a number of them all fairly consistent. So it's harder for the cancer to become resistant. But then, because we have this starvation escape pathways method, it doesn't really matter that we welcome resistance, right? Because as long as the resistance is narrow, meaning they don't have too many pathways that can keep them alive, because then we can target them. So, for example, a lot of the times the resistance comes from PI3 kinase, right? It comes from PI3 kinase AKT signaling. So we have drugs that can target that. So if we see that light up, then we know that's how the cancer is staying alive. So we add the PI3 kinase inhibitor, and it usually works very well, right? So the beauty, it seems to that the fasting is making these escape pathways just 2 to 3, right? 2 to 3, and then there is no other escape for the cancer. There is no other way to become adapted.
So it really sounds like a very dynamic approach to treating a personalized dynamic approach to treating that individual with cancer.
Yeah, it is. So and eventually it's going to be very rapid identification. We will be able to do it literally within a couple hours. Now the technology is not quite there, but I think it will be.
Can we go back for just a moment to glioblastoma? Because we've seen data now for 15 years about a ketogenic diet as it relates to glioblastoma, and using your approach, do you have a robust glioblastoma experience? And if so, what are you seeing?
Yeah, so we've been working with glioblastoma for a long time. And so we see the fasting conditions making the radiotherapy better, making the chemotherapy better. However, it's so aggressive that I think it definitely, and we've also used ketogenic diet plus fasting mimicking diet plus, so we rotate, right? Plus the chemo plus the radio, all of it, right? And with lots of patients that we're following. But I think we're going to need the escape pathway blockade, right? So unfortunately, it's not available yet. And that's, that's maybe a little bit of the complaint that I have with the FDA. It would be nice if they had a much easier way for those like glioblastoma patients to have a more rapid N01 clinical trial, right?
Allowing them access, for compassionate need, right?
Yeah, more easily with the oncologists being less scared because, for example, we publish on vitamin C plus fasting mimicking diet plus chemo in being very effective against colorectal cancer, right? But now to do that an infusion of vitamin C, even if somebody is stage 4 and in trouble, is extremely difficult. We don't know who to go to, and it's like it's vitamin C, right? This person is likely to be at the end of the possibilities. Please, let's try, right? No, I mean we've not been able to do this. Even though it's infusion of vitamin C, people do it for the fun of it, right? And yet we are not able to do it. Yeah.
So, the book is pretty much about your success in using your approach to prime cancer cells, and to restrict the exposure or the detrimental effects of chemotherapy on normal cells, taking advantage of the difference. But even beyond cancer, I think you've looked at aging, you've looked at Alzheimer's. So let's talk about Alzheimer's if we can for just a moment. Why would this type of dietary approach be something that might protect the brain or that might even be useful in a patient with existing Alzheimer's disease?
Yes. So I think that, we don't quite know exactly what's causing Alzheimer's disease. Certainly, I think one thing that everybody is agreeing with is neuroinflammation. And microglia and potentially astrocytes causing lots of problems. Many years ago, we had published, for example, that if microglia are exposed to beta amyloid or to LPS, a pro-inflammatory agent, they start making a lot of peroxynitrite. And it was really impressive how the peroxynitrite that they made a hole through it killed every neuron that was nearby, right? So if it was microglia plus a pro-inflammatory agent, everything around those microglia died by peroxynitrite, so superoxide plus nitric oxide dependent toxicity. Yeah, so then the fasting mimicking diet we publish in mice in different mouse Alzheimer models have a very strong anti-inflammatory and neuroinflammatory effect, right? So they reduce tremendously many of these inflammatory responses, and A and B. We also know that neural stem cells are increased, and ketogenesis is imposed on the brain. So the brain now is forced to undergo a different metabolic modality. So we hope that, at least in mice, is very clear. But in people, we just finished a trial on Alzheimer's disease. But I'm afraid that that's probably we pick Alzheimer patients that were early Alzheimer, but still too late to bring back in with the fasting mimicking diet. We'll see what the results are, but certainly I think probably this dietary intervention probably more effective in the mild cognitive impairment and maybe a little bit earlier state. So now that we can predict better and better.
Let me comment on what you just said, because it really strikes a chord in me. And that is, you said, well, maybe we should get patients with mild cognitive impairment, or even before that, subjective cognitive impairment. And, my messaging over the years has been, why wait until people have cognitive issues if the metabolic problems that are so common presage the cognitive decline by decades? This, to me, it seems reasonable that we intervene early on. So I think what I'm getting at is, you have created a truly groundbreaking program that you're using as an adjunctive therapy for cancer patients, but you are exploring in a metabolic condition that we call Alzheimer's disease. Why wouldn't anyone who is interested in being healthy and disease resistant and pursuing longevity want to consider what you're talking about in terms of the fasting mimicking program?
Yeah, and actually, we're in the most advanced stage for two things. One is biological age, and one is obesity and diabetes, right? And so both of them these are the major risk factor for Alzheimer, right? Biological age and diabetes and obesity. So we now have many clinical trials showing that fasting mimicking diet cycles can regress diabetes, regress obesity without the type of side effects that we see for the GLP-1 agonist. Loss of muscle loss. We don't see that with the fasting mimicking diet. And now it's trial number 5 or so. We just published another one with 100 patients just a few days ago. Yeah, so absolutely. I think that especially those maybe ApoE4, having 1 copy or 2 copies of ApoE4 that are more at risk for Alzheimer's disease, I think that fasting mimicking diets are definitely and maybe time restricted eating and also what I call the longevity diet. All the dietary intervention plus the exercise are clear ways to postpone, if nothing else, postpone by a number of years the onset of Alzheimer. And most people don't realize if you just can postpone by 5 or 6 years, most people will die of natural causes, and so we will
or
cut
something else. That's comforting.
Yeah, and so we will cut. Let's say somebody's 90 years old, right? Then they might end up dying of something else and never develop Alzheimer's disease, and that's pretty good. That to say from 85 to 90 or 91. Being able to live this extra 5 or 6 years Alzheimer's free.
Well, one would assume, though, that you would be also reducing risk across the spectrum of chronic degenerative conditions and possibly even cancer then by this intervention as it relates to immune functionality, for example.
Yeah, so we've shown, for example, the lymphoid myeloid ratio, which is one of the measures of immunosenescence, and being at least partially restored or rejuvenated in people over the age of 40. We would like to do more, but certainly the initial data was on a good group on a good size patient population was very encouraging. But also, as I mentioned earlier, biological age is reduced after 3 cycles of the FMD by about 2.5 years. Yeah, that's pretty good if you think about it. This is just done one time in 3 months. Yeah, so I think it's got the potential of having a big impact on Alzheimer, even in the absence of daily nutritional interventions.
Is there a sense that your intervention is having some effect via changes in the microbiome?
In mice, it's very clear, at least when we looked at inflammatory bowel disease models, it was very clear. In people, I think we need more data. In mice, it was easier to look at microbiota changes, and we saw big changes in lactobacillus, bifidobacteria, and then we were able to do these fecal transplants and actually demonstrate that some of these bacteria were helping fight the autoimmunity. In people, I think it's still early, but I could tell you that soon enough there's going to be 2 clinical trials published, one on Crohn's and one on colitis. So I think those will all shed light on the potential of this fasting mimicking diet and reshaping microbiota and more so affecting intestinal inflammation and autoimmune disorders.
Yeah, well, that might also open the way for another inroad, another on-ramp to couple with what you're doing. If you could see what those changes are, and if some of them seem maladaptive, perhaps they could be corrected in such a way that, what do you see in terms of LPS or LPS antibodies, i.e. gut permeability, on your diet versus control? And is there any evidence in humans that has changed?
Yeah, these 2 trials are going to look at that. Yeah, so we'll see, but they're pretty extensive. One is 80 people, and the other one is 40 or 60, I forgot. One Crohn's, one colitis. So we'll have a lot of the data, I would say, in the next 6 to 8 months available. And I've seen the data, but it's not my trial, so I cannot talk about their data. But let's say that I was happy to see the results. Yeah.
Good. Cellular repair mechanisms. A discussion about FOXO. Is that relevant in terms of the fasting mimicking diet intervention?
I think the fasting mimicking diet triggers a very coordinated response, right? So which is autophagy, stem cells, cellular reprogramming, all together, plus repair, improvement in intracellular repair. So I think it's probably an evolved, because it is so powerful and it's so wide acting, it is probably evolved for that purpose. So for example, we just did a study, mouse, rat, and humans for kidney disease, right? And so we showed that in collaboration with Laura Perrin at the Children's Hospital Los Angeles. And we show that if you use a nephrotoxin to damage the kidney, the kidney completely loses its architecture, its normal architecture. We can tell this by something called special transcriptomics. And then we start a fasting mimicking diet, and you see that the kidney architecture going back to normal, the pre-toxin state, almost by a magic program. And it makes sense, right? It makes sense that a lot of organs, we had shown something very similar for the pancreas. We've shown some evidence for that for the gut. So it's probably everywhere, right? Everywhere that there is ability of the organ and the system to rebuild what's being damaged by whatever it is that did the damage. And it's probably involving all of these things, right? Autophagy, stem cell, cellular reprogramming, Yamanaka factors, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's a very, and this is why, there's, most people I talk to, this idea that the drugs are very sophisticated, like GLP-1 or, statins. But if you think about it, they're very unsophisticated, right? They're just targeting one thing, and we, not in the context of this, beautiful 3 billion years of this almost perfect system. And so you're interfering with something, and you're not thinking what are the consequences of just blocking something over and over and over when it's not meant to be blocked, right? So yeah, it's interesting to me. I just I'm very entertained by this idea that the sufficient is the drug, is not the ability of the system, activating the ability of the system to repair itself.
Well, we had Dr. David Sinclair on the program talking about his work using 3 of the 4 Yamanaka factors in the rodent model, and this whole notion of cellular reprogramming clearly going to be the future of medicine. And you mentioned about the recreation of the architecture of the kidney in these animal model, and we're clearly going to see more and more of that. I think the issue, of course, is would be tumorigenesis, if not. That seems to be the concern or the stumbling block in terms of translating that type of intervention or that type of technology.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that we're using something that is much less likely to cause tumors because it's part of the repair system that organs have sort of turned off, right? They have it, but it's turned off. And then only certain things, and fasting and refeeding is one of them. The forceful activation of the Yamanaka factor, and the work that David and Belmonte and others and Manuel Serrano have been doing, I think we have to sort of join forces, right? I mean, why? Because one is, I think the reprogramming is more forceful, but it's going to be very difficult for this forcefulness to get it right in all these divisions. Ours is much more sophisticated and much weaker, right? So I think that there is something that we're working on that. So we now have the Yamanaka mice, and we're working on the same thing, but we're trying to utilize our understanding of how to turn on and off things in a very coordinated way.
Let me ask you, just hypothetically, unless you have data, what is the sense of GLP-1 agonists in terms of cancer production, or even reduction of risk, or even could there be a therapeutic role of this profound metabolic modulator, mitochondrial activator, et cetera, in actual treatment of cancer? Any thoughts?
I'm not a big fan of GLP-1, so I think that it's hiding a little bit the system that we should apply to really get things to work, which is a nutritional intervention that is feasible. And I think what we're seeing now after many trials, we see the same effect as GLP-1 without the side effects. And so, of course, if you lose a lot of weight, we already know that, right? Obesity is a risk factor for cancer. It is a risk factor for Alzheimer. So you're going to see all of those. The question is, you're also going to see the optic nerve ischemia. You're going to see the bone density loss. I mean, although bone density is not that clear, but certainly the muscle loss, the retinopathy, right? So I think we talk too much about the good and not the bad when we already know that if it was reimbursed and there was a team that specializes, we could get people to get there without the side effects and turning and getting rid of some biological age years. So by far, I think that we've seen it before with a lot of other drugs, and now in this particular one, we already seen so many side effects that I'm really, when you see the JAMA Ophthalmology and other journals publishing on this, 4 to 8 times more likeliness to develop optic nerve ischemia. That should already be enough to make it only a backup drug. Nothing else works. Kind of like bariatric surgery. That is my opinion.
No, I hear you. Above all, do no harm, and we are starting to see data at least suggesting an increased risk of thyroid cancer. That said, and I'm not arguing a point here, but I'm, like you, we watch the literature and try to figure out where it's going, knowing that prediction is that by 2030, about a third of Americans are going to be using GLP-1 agonist drugs. And having said that, if your goal in terms of what you're trying to accomplish from a physiologic perspective is increasing insulin sensitivity, decreasing blood glucose, and decreasing IGF-1, all the various metabolic parameters that you're trying to achieve. And it looks like GLP-1s may be influential in those areas. And I'm not suggesting that, this is something we should all adopt because of the fact that it has these profound metabolic metrics associated with it. But it just seems to me that there may be a role in the future, at least in terms of augmenting what Dr. Valter Longo is doing in a way that might be easier for patients. And again, I'm not supportive of that, but it is something I think worth considering.
Well, we have data. I mean, I cannot talk about it that involves also GLP-1. So it doesn't look like GLP-1 is doing the job. I think there is, we have lots of evidence that with knockout mice, there's something else that is doing the job. We're going to send it out for publication very soon. And so, I mean, there's no doubt that these pathways are involved in good things, right? But they're part of a very sophisticated program and they play a role. But if you take them out of that program, then you get the optic nerve ischemia, the loss of muscle mass, et cetera, right? So, yeah, I mean, is it possible that we are in a world where there is nothing you can do? People will not even do. So we're now showing diabetes and obesity regression in about 70% of the patients by just doing the FMD once a month or in some cases even less, right? And then this is just year one. So it's 5 days a month for 6 to 12 cycles. We see 70% regressing. So this is not changing anybody's diet. It's not asking people to do more exercise. It's not asking anything. That's great if they do it, but that's not part of why it works, right? So when you see that, then you have to say, this is the way to do it. Of course, I'm biased. You can say, yeah, right, because you came up with it. But I mean, I also mentioned, for example, with Sachin Panda and other work with it, and a more moderate version of it, like 12 hours of time restricted eating. That seems to also work very well, right? So I've been saying, hey, combine maybe the fasting mimicking diet. We're now doing a trial with 500 patients. We're almost done in southern Italy, the worst zone of Europe. 500 patients. We're at number 430 now. So we do the fasting mimicking diet only once every 3 months. And then with or without what we call the longevity diet, so a very healthy Okinawa/Mediterranean diet, right? But so we'll see what happens. But I mean, the point is that with a reasonable effort, if you just had a part-time or some dietitian that you see once every 3 months, the great majority of people could, in a very healthy way, without changing their lifestyle, go back to a much healthier status, less obese, less overweight, and most of them non-diabetic anymore, right? So I don't buy this. We're gonna need. Of course, some people need bariatric surgery, and I have friends that are bariatric surgeons, and they do a lot of good. So I agree. Yeah, for some people, you just don't have an option, and if you don't have an option, I think GLP-1 may be a good one, maybe not, right? Because I like to see more data on the severe side effects, right? Not on the muscle loss, and I mean, yeah, on the muscle loss too, but certainly the ones, if people are going blind, that would be a reason to be very worried. But so then, and I think I like to see this much more discussed out there than it is right now, because of course, if we talk about how people are great they're doing, and we don't talk about the one going blind, then people are going to be more and more excited about it.
Well, it's pervasive, and I think what is really interesting is the new data that is looking at behavioral changes induced by GLP-1 agonist drugs, in terms of things like impulsivity being reduced. Allowing people to, what the research has demonstrated is that people are more able to tap into prefrontal cortex, as opposed to behaving or activating their amygdala in terms of how they see the world, so that the mindset of the planet will be affected by the pervasive use of these drugs globally. So we'll see how it plays out. But, again, I think it's a grand experiment. And, you mentioned the issues with vision.
Right. No, but it goes also the other way around, right? Now with the joy of food, and so there are reports talking about how you lose that, and then depression, it seems to be increased, right? So yeah, so you see that there are two sides, and I think that the problematic one seems to be so far, by looking at, seems to be the bigger one, right? And also, I think not to discount, I wrote an article for an Italian newspaper recently, not to discount the importance of effort, right? So we're getting to this mentality where any effort is too much effort.
That's the way of the world. I mean, you could sit on your couch and order dinner and have it delivered to your front door almost by a drone. There's nothing you need to do. You're right.
Yeah, but I would argue that 50 years ago, I forget the doctor's name, and the guy that introduced the exercise, and people didn't know what the exercise was, right? And everybody, and I was reading an interview from like 1980, and he was saying that a lot of doctors were saying this is terrible idea, it's going to kill people, and people are going to die from all these miles of running, and hey, sure enough, that was not true, right? And sure enough, a lot of people exercise regularly now. So I think that yeah, there's a little bit of design conspiracy, a lot of it, because if we done it for exercise, which I will argue is pretty tough to do, and a lot of people, I think about half of the Americans and half of Europeans do some type of regular exercise, adults. And yeah, if we've done it for exercise, I will argue that effort is part of what we are and who we are. And, as long as it's not excessive, so I mentioned in the article, yeah, I mean, if somebody told me I had to do 50 miles a week of exercise, I would say, forget it. But, an hour of exercise every other day, okay, and most of it, I do it at home.
Yeah. A new study came out in JAMA actually indicated that for the so-called weekend warrior, in terms of risk reduction across 45 different diseases, that even people who only exercise 3 days a week or on the weekend, something like that, had great benefits. And it kind of dovetails with your notion of doing a fasting mimicking diet for 5 days a month, that you do reap significant benefits from that. There's one area I wanted to just jump in before we close, and not that it's drug centric, but one wonders, and I get a lot of questions about this. What role might metformin play in the work that you do in terms of, could it be adjunctive towards cancer chemotherapy or treatment, or even adjunctive in terms of as it relates to FMD, the drug metformin?
Yeah, so I just looked at a meta-analysis, and it showed very little advantages long-term. I think one of the only advantages that were showing for metformin was the reduction in the people that went from pre-diabetes to diabetes. So, I mean, Nir Barzilai and others have been proposing that, this should be the anti-aging drug. And so, again, I will argue that there's better ways to do this that are safer and less likely to cause problems, and that metformin should only be there for those that they cannot do it right, but do it right within a context where people have the healthcare professional to help them do it right. So the way it is right now, I mean, who can do it right? This is not reimbursed. Very few people are trained. The doctors are not really trained to do any of the lifestyle coaching. So of course it's not working right now. But yeah, I will argue that metformin is a good one, probably, meaning like it's probably one of the safest drugs that's been given for a long time. But in this meta-analysis, I forgot how many studies. It was a crazy number of studies, over 100, I think they were looking at, and they were concluding it doesn't really do a lot, right? In the end, it doesn't do a lot. Now, again, Nir will argue that no, there are studies that show that people on metformin do better. Diabetic people on metformin do better than regular people without metformin. So I don't know, but this is a meta-analysis looking at over 100 studies, and the conclusion was it doesn't do much. And it's not surprising, right? It's another interfering, and it's interfering with some of my favorite pathways. I mean, my lab discovered that the role of the tyrosine kinase pathway in aging in 2001. So, I mean, this is a drug that is interfering with TOR signaling, with activity AMP kinase signaling. So I really am a fan of that, but I'm not surprised that in the long run, these drugs will do as much good as they do bad.
I have to say, I'm smiling because you said interfere with some of my favorite pathways. Who in this world has favorite biochemical pathways? Think about that. I mean, for me, NRF2 is my favorite pathway. If somebody were to ask me, no one has ever asked me. I don't know if anybody's ever asked you that. So a cancer patient sees his or her oncologist and is about to undergo chemotherapy for whatever the cancer may be, comes to find your book. And what do they do now? They take the book to the oncologist. What's the next step? How can they employ all of your wisdom and have a better outcome?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think in general they can come to the Create Cures clinic. It's a nonprofit, and certainly there's personnel trained there to help them, and it's fairly inexpensive. Or at least there are programs that are expensive, but programs that are very inexpensive. And then I think, the oncologist, and make sure that whatever the dietitians come up with, the oncologist is aware of and agrees with, and those are the recommendations. Then there are different things that for different stage patients, we tend to not recommend fasting mimicking diets in the early stage cancer patients that are very much likely to be cured by the surgery or a few cycles of chemo. But we tend to give FMD plus the longevity diet, plus the time restricted eating, plus the physical exercise and training. We tend to give all of those to the stage 4, stage 3, stage 4, for whom things do not seem to be working. And we of course, we've seen a lot of really excellent results, both in the clinical trials, in the randomized trials, and in the observations. But I think it's really important that the patient, no matter what stage they're in, this was something we focus on. We say, no matter what stage you're in, we've seen many like you having incredible results, right? So it doesn't mean you're going to have it, but hey, we've seen many, right? So could it be that even though you're in trouble, this particular combination works for you, right? And that's what we've been focusing on.
Well, let me say thank you for sharing your wisdom with us today. It's always so inspirational to talk to you because you're doing such great work. And I was very taken at the beginning of the book where you talk about where profits generated go to the foundation, and such beautiful altruism. I really love that. And I'm so excited about this book, and I'm hoping people realize that there's more to the story than just being at the mercy of the outcome of the chemo or radiation or whatever the treatment may be. There's more to the story that they need to be aware of. So, gosh, thanks again for joining us.
Oh, thank you for the great questions.
Hope to see you soon. Bye-bye. Wow, what an interview. Dr. Longo is doing some incredible work and having really great success, really serving to educate all of us as to the value of his nutritional intervention to augment or enhance the effectiveness of standard cancer therapy. Again, his book is called Fasting Cancer, a really wonderful read that I strongly recommend, really for everyone. It really, I think, makes it clear that fasting from time to time is a good thing for all of us to augment immune function and help us rid our bodies of cancer cells as well. I'm Dr. David Perlmutter here on The Empowering Neurologist. Thank you for joining me. We'll be back soon. Bye for now.